The conference room aboard Station Nexus had been designed by committee, which explained why it managed to accommodate 17 different atmospheric requirements while somehow making everyone equally uncomfortable. Ambassador Keth 9 of the hegemonic reaches adjusted his breathing apparatus for the third time and wondered, not for the first time, why evolution had cursed his species with such sensitive respiratory systems. Across the circular table, the Vorthak delegation sat in their environmental suits, looking like metallic scarecrows with attitude problems. "The preliminary biological assessments are complete," announced Coordinator Vex, whose species had the unfortunate distinction of appearing to be permanently disappointed. "The humans check out on all standard metrics: tool use, abstract reasoning, mathematical concepts, basic empathy protocols." "Basic being the operative term," muttered Representative Zal from behind her crystalline face shield. "Have you reviewed their entertainment archives?" Dr. Theron, the consortium's chief xenopsychologist, tapped his data pad with one of his 4 arms. "That's precisely why we're here. The Species Integration Board has flagged some concerning patterns in human cultural output. Their fictional narratives display an unusual fixation with catastrophic scenarios and interpersonal violence." Ambassador Keth 9 leaned forward. "Define unusual." "They tell stories about their planet being destroyed for entertainment. Multiple times, in multiple ways. They seem to enjoy imagining their own extinction." Theron's secondary arms gestured helplessly. "Our psychological models can't process this behavior." "Perhaps," suggested the Vorthak speaker through his translator, "they're simply more realistic about cosmic threats than the rest of us." The room fell silent. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that the Vorthak, despite being militaristic by galactic standards, found human creativity concerning. Representative Zal's crystalline form shimmered with what her species considered polite skepticism. "Their children's bedtime stories feature beings that consume souls. Their romantic literature involves protagonists willing to die for temporary emotional attachment. Their comedy celebrates failure and embarrassment." "And yet," Coordinator Vex said, consulting his notes, "they've requested cultural exchange protocols. They want to share their storytelling traditions with the galaxy." "That's what worries me," Theron replied. The door chimed, and everyone turned as Dr. Elena Vasquez entered the conference room. She wore the standard Earth diplomatic uniform, which somehow managed to look both professional and slightly rebellious, and carried a data case that probably contained more disturbing human cultural artifacts than anyone in the room was prepared to handle. "Apologies for the delay," she said, settling into the human-designated chair with the easy confidence of someone who had no idea she was walking into her own species' psychological evaluation. "Traffic control around the station is absolutely insane. You'd think with all this advanced technology, someone would have figured out how to coordinate spaceship parking." The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Right," Dr. Vasquez continued, apparently interpreting their stunned expressions as eager anticipation. "I understand you're interested in human mythological traditions. I have to say, I'm thrilled someone finally wants to hear about our storytelling heritage. Most species we've encountered seem to think our cultural output is a bit disturbing," suggested Ambassador Keth 9. "I was going to say intense, but sure." She activated her data pad with obvious enthusiasm. "Now, where would you like to start? We've got creation myths, destruction myths, transformation myths, hero cycles, cautionary tales, and some absolutely fascinating death and rebirth narratives." Dr. Theron's 4 arms went very still. "You have entire categories for destruction myths." "Oh, dozens of them. Every culture on Earth has at least one way the world ends: floods, fires, ice ages, divine judgment, cosmic collision, heat death, nuclear annihilation, ecological collapse, artificial intelligence uprising, alien invasion, zombie apocalypse, demonic incursion, reality breakdown. We're really quite creative about ultimate scenarios. Representative Zal's crystalline form flickered with what might have been panic. And you tell these stories to your young? Well, not the really gruesome ones. We save those for teenagers. Dr. Vasquez smiled brightly. Children get the sanitized versions. Dragons that can be defeated, monsters that can be outsmarted, witches that can be overcome with cleverness and cooperation. The Vorthak speaker's translator made a sound that could have been static or existential horror. You teach your offspring to fight dragons? Metaphorically, yes. The dragon represents whatever obstacle or challenge they'll face in life. The hero's journey is all about growth through adversity, right? You face the monster, you learn something about yourself, you come back changed and stronger. Coordinator Vex looked around the table at his colleagues. Nobody seemed to be breathing properly anymore. And the monsters in these stories, they're defeated through violence? Sometimes. Sometimes through wisdom. Sometimes through sacrifice. Sometimes through love. Sometimes through accepting that some problems don't have solutions, and you just have to find a way to live with them. Dr. Vasquez opened her data case and pulled out a collection of files. Take our dragon myths. European dragons tend to be adversaries. You fight them for treasure or to save someone. But Asian dragons are often benevolent forces of nature that you have to learn to work with rather than against. She looked up to find 17 different species staring at her with expressions that ranged from fascination to horror. The fascinating thing is how universal certain themes are across human cultures. The flood myth appears everywhere. Mesopotamian, Hebrew, Hindu, Native American traditions all have versions of divine judgment through drowning the world and starting over. Dr. Theron's primary arms were gripping his datapad so tightly that the metal was beginning to bend. Starting over? Right, the cleansing apocalypse. Wipe out the old world because it's become corrupt or evil, save a few worthy individuals, rebuild civilization from scratch. Dr. Vasquez's smile widened. It's remarkably optimistic when you think about it. No matter how bad things get, there's always the possibility of redemption through destruction and renewal. The conference room had become so quiet that the environmental systems seemed loud. 17 different species processed the concept of finding optimism in universal annihilation. Ambassador Keith Nine finally managed to speak. Dr. Vasquez, when you say these stories are popular, oh, incredibly popular. Some of our most beloved stories involve complete civilizational collapse. Post-apocalyptic fiction is huge right now. And our disaster movies... She paused, noticing their expressions for the first time. Is everything all right? You all look a bit pale. Well, those of you who have blood-based circulation systems. Representative Zal's crystalline form was flickering rapidly now. Dr. Vasquez, these stories you're describing, do humans find them disturbing? Disturbing? No, why would we find them disturbing? Dr. Vasquez looked genuinely confused. They're just stories. They help us process difficult concepts and prepare psychologically for challenging situations. Plus, they're entertaining. The word entertaining seemed to hit the room like a physical force. Dr. Theron cleared his throat with all 4 of his respiratory systems. You find the complete destruction of your civilization entertaining? Well, yes. I mean, it's fiction. We know it's not real. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward with the enthusiasm of someone warming to her favorite subject. The best apocalyptic stories aren't really about the end of the world. They're about what people do when everything they thought was permanent turns out to be temporary. How do you maintain your humanity when civilization collapses? What do you sacrifice to protect what you love? How do you find hope when everything seems hopeless? She smiled again, and this time everyone in the room noticed. It was a perfectly pleasant smile, warm and engaging, and completely genuine. But she was smiling while discussing the psychological appeal of civilizational collapse, and somehow that made it the most unsettling expression any of them had ever seen. The meeting had officially stopped, though nobody wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. "Perhaps," suggested Coordinator Vex after a lengthy pause, "we could explore some of your less comprehensive mythological traditions?" Dr. Vasquez brightened immediately. "Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about cosmic horror. That's where things get really interesting from a philosophical standpoint. If the previous silence had been uncomfortable, this one was practically suffocating." Ambassador Keith 9 made a noise that his species typically reserved for imminent predator attacks. "Cosmic horror is all about the fundamental insignificance of individual consciousness in the face of vast, incomprehensible forces," Dr. Vasquez continued, completely oblivious to the fact that half the delegates were now gripping their chairs. "The protagonists discover that reality operates on principles so alien and hostile that simply understanding them drives you insane." The Vorthak speaker's translator crackled. "And humans enjoy this? Love it. We have entire publishing houses dedicated to existential dread. The basic premise is that knowledge itself can be dangerous, that there are truths about the universe that mortal minds weren't designed to comprehend." She pulled up another file. "Take Lovecraft's work, for example. His creatures aren't evil in any way we understand evil. They're just so fundamentally different from us that their mere existence negates the importance of human concerns." Dr. Theron's forearms had gone completely limp. "You read stories about your own cosmic insignificance for pleasure? Recreation, education, catharsis. It serves multiple functions. The fear response is part of the appeal, but there's also the intellectual satisfaction of confronting uncomfortable truths about existence." Dr. Vasquez gestured enthusiastically. "Plus, cosmic horror teaches us to be humble about our place in the universe, while simultaneously celebrating the courage it takes to keep living despite that knowledge." Representative Zal's crystalline form was now pulsing with what her species considered extreme distress. "Dr. Vasquez, when you say courage, right, that's the beautiful part. The human heroes in these stories know they're probably doomed from the moment they start investigating. But they investigate anyway. They pursue truth even when they suspect that truth will destroy them." Her smile returned, somehow managing to be both warm and deeply unsettling. "It's the ultimate expression of intellectual integrity." The room's environmental systems seemed to be working overtime. Several delegates were showing signs of hyperventilation, which was particularly impressive given that 3 species present didn't technically breathe. "Moving on," said Coordinator Vex weakly. "What did you call them? Cautionary tales?" "Oh, those are fascinating because they reveal so much about human moral frameworks." Dr. Vasquez opened yet another file, and everyone present had the simultaneous realization that her data case probably contained enough psychological ammunition to traumatize entire star systems. "Take our fairy tales. On the surface, they seem simple. Good versus evil, virtue rewarded, wickedness punished. But dig deeper, and you find these incredibly complex explorations of moral ambiguity." Ambassador Keth 9 managed to croak, "Moral ambiguity?" "Absolutely. Take Cinderella. The traditional version doesn't end with forgiveness and reconciliation. The stepsisters get their eyes pecked out by birds and spend the rest of their lives blind. The fairy tale teaches children that sometimes justice requires permanent, irreversible consequences." Dr. Theron's grip on his datapad had progressed to the point where small metal fragments were beginning to flake off. "You teach children about permanent consequences through stories involving ocular mutilation?" "Well, we've sanitized the modern versions quite a bit, but historically, yes. Children need to understand that actions have lasting results, that some mistakes can't be undone, that the world isn't always fair or forgiving. Dr. Vasquez paused thoughtfully. Our fairy tales prepare children for a universe where sometimes the only choice is between different types of suffering. The Vorthak speaker made a sound that their translator apparently couldn't parse. After a moment of electronic confusion, it settled on rendering the noise as, "And your heroes?" Representative Zal asked, in a voice that sounded like crystal breaking slowly. "They accept this suffering willingly?" "That's what makes them heroes. Anyone can be brave when they're guaranteed to win. Real courage means doing the right thing when you know it might cost you everything." Dr. Vasquez's enthusiasm was reaching fever pitch. "Our greatest heroes are the ones who sacrifice themselves for others. They walk knowingly into situations where they'll probably die, because someone has to, and they've decided it should be them." Coordinator Vex was making notes with the desperate efficiency of someone trying to maintain professional composure while experiencing a complete philosophical breakdown. "Dr. Vasquez, when you say your heroes choose to die..." "Oh, not just die. That's the easy part. The really compelling heroes choose to suffer. They take on other people's pain, carry burdens that aren't theirs, accept blame for things they didn't do." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "We have entire religious traditions built around the idea that suffering can be redemptive, that choosing to endure pain for others is the highest expression of love." The silence that followed this statement was so complete that several delegates checked their translation devices to make sure they were still functioning. Ambassador Keth 9 finally found his voice. "Dr. Vasquez, in these stories where your heroes choose suffering, do other humans admire them?" "Admire them? We worship them. Literally, in some cases. Our most revered historical figures are people who could have chosen safety and comfort, but instead chose hardship and sacrifice for the greater good." Her smile had taken on an almost beatific quality. "We build monuments to people who threw away their own happiness to protect others." Dr. Theron was now openly staring at his psychological assessment forms as if they had personally betrayed him. "And this is normal human behavior?" "Aspirational human behavior. Most of us never achieve that level of selflessness, but we recognize it as the ideal when we see it." Dr. Vasquez consulted her notes. "Which brings us to the really interesting stuff. Our war stories. If it were possible for a conference room full of advanced alien civilizations to collectively faint, this would have been the moment. Instead, they just sat there, in stunned silence, processing the revelation that they hadn't even reached the really interesting stuff yet. War stories are where you see human nature at its most complex," Dr. Vasquez continued, apparently interpreting their catatonic expressions as rapt attention. "Because war forces people to make impossible choices with incomplete information under extreme stress. It's the ultimate test of character." Representative Zal's crystalline form had stopped flickering entirely. "Dr. Vasquez, when you say war is a test, the ultimate crucible for human development. Strip away civilization, comfort, safety, certainty. What's left? That's when you discover who you really are." Her voice carried the kind of genuine enthusiasm that most species reserved for discussing pleasant weather or successful harvests. "Our war heroes aren't people who won battles. They're people who maintained their humanity in situations designed to destroy it." The meeting had evolved beyond merely stopping. It had entered some new category of suspended reality, where time itself seemed reluctant to proceed. "Actually," interrupted Coordinator Vex, with the desperation of someone throwing himself on a grenade, "perhaps we should discuss human recreational activities instead." Dr. Vasquez looked puzzled. But war stories are recreational activities. We watch them, read them, play interactive simulations of them. Some of our most popular entertainment involves strategic combat scenarios where players compete to see who can most efficiently eliminate opposing forces. The Vorthak speaker's translator gave up entirely and began emitting a low, continuous whine. "What Coordinator Vex means," Ambassador Keth9 said carefully, "is perhaps we could explore human leisure pursuits that don't involve conflict resolution." "Oh, you want to hear about our sports?" Dr. Vasquez's face lit up with renewed enthusiasm. "Now there's a fascinating cultural window. Take our gladiatorial traditions. We gather in massive stadiums to watch individuals engage in ritualized combat until one side achieves dominance through superior physicality and tactical planning." Dr. Theron looked up from his assessment forms with hollow eyes. "Gladiatorial? Well, we don't call them gladiators anymore. Football players, hockey players, boxers, mixed martial artists, but the principle is the same. Controlled. Violence as public spectacle. Individual warriors representing tribal affiliations. Crowds cheering for blood and victory. She pulled up a new file. "The really interesting thing is how we've institutionalized this impulse across virtually every physical activity." Representative Zal's voice came out as barely more than a crystalline whisper. "Every physical activity? Competition is fundamental to human recreation. Running, jumping, swimming, climbing. We turn everything into contests to determine hierarchical superiority. Even our collaborative activities have competitive elements. Team sports are basically stylized warfare with arbitrary rules and non-lethal outcomes." The room's atmospheric processors were working so hard they'd begun making stressed mechanical noises. "And children participate in these stylized warfare activities?" asked Coordinator Vex. "We start them young. Little League, youth soccer, junior Olympics. Competition builds character, teaches valuable lessons about winning and losing, helps develop the psychological resilience they'll need for adult challenges." Dr. Vasquez gestured enthusiastically. "Plus it's fun. Children love games where they can test themselves against opponents." Ambassador Keith-9 was beginning to understand why his species had developed such sensitive respiratory systems. They were an evolutionary defense mechanism against conversations like this one. "Dr. Vasquez, when you say children love competitive challenges, they're naturally drawn to it. Put human children in a room together, and within minutes they'll have invented some way to determine who's fastest, strongest, smartest, or most skilled at arbitrary tasks." Her smile had taken on the quality of someone discussing universal constants. "Competition teaches them that effort produces results, that excellence requires dedication, and that sometimes you lose despite doing everything right." Dr. Theron set his assessment forms aside entirely. They were no longer adequate for what he was witnessing. And losing, this is considered educational? Essential. Humans who never experience failure don't develop proper coping mechanisms for adversity. Our educational systems deliberately introduce controlled failure experiences to build psychological resilience. She leaned back in her chair with obvious satisfaction. "We've learned that protecting children from all disappointment actually cripples their emotional development." The silence that followed contained multitudes of unspoken horror. Representative Zal finally managed to speak. "Dr. Vasquez, these failure experiences, they're intentional?" "Absolutely. Academic challenges designed to push students beyond their comfort zones, physical activities that test their limits, social situations that require them to navigate rejection and disappointment." Her voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone explaining basic physics. "Pain is an excellent teacher. It provides immediate or memorable feedback about the consequences of poor decisions." Coordinator Vex was now taking notes with the mechanical precision of someone whose conscious mind had fled the scene. And adult humans, they appreciate this educational approach? We celebrate it. Our most respected educational institutions are the ones with the highest failure rates. Military training, medical school, advanced technical programs. We specifically seek out learning environments that will push us to our breaking point and beyond. Dr. Vasquez opened another file. Which reminds me of our coming-of-age rituals. If the previous silences had been uncomfortable, this one achieved something approaching existential vacuum. Coming-of-age traditions vary by culture, but they all share common themes: separation from childhood safety, exposure to genuine hardship, demonstration of adult capabilities under stress, and formal recognition of the individual's readiness to face life's challenges. She scrolled through her data with obvious pleasure. Some involve physical trials, some psychological challenges, some spiritual ordeals, but they all require the candidate to prove they can endure, suffering without losing their essential humanity. Ambassador Keth 9 made a sound that his translator rendered as query, definition of essential humanity unclear. The ability to maintain compassion, integrity, and hope despite experiencing pain, loss, and disappointment. Adult humans are expected to function effectively while carrying significant emotional and psychological burdens. Dr. Vasquez looked around the table with genuine warmth. It's actually quite beautiful when you think about it. We're teaching young people that strength isn't the absence of suffering, it's the ability to suffer and still choose kindness. The environmental systems had given up trying to maintain optimal atmospheric conditions. Several warning lights were blinking, but nobody seemed to notice. Dr. Theron finally broke the silence. Dr. Vasquez, these traditions you're describing, do humans consider them normal? Universal. Every human culture has some version of these practices. We may disagree about methodology, but we all recognize that transitioning from childhood to adulthood requires confronting difficult truths about existence. Her enthusiasm remained utterly genuine. Children live in a world where problems have solutions, and adults make everything better. Adults live in a world where some problems don't have solutions, and sometimes you have to be the person who makes things better for others. She paused, finally noticing that 17 different species were staring at her with expressions of pure, unadulterated terror. Is something wrong? You all look like you've seen a ghost? The irony was not lost on anyone present that humans had probably invented recreational activities involving ghosts too. Dr. Vasquez, Coordinator Vex said, with the careful precision of someone defusing an explosive device. Before we conclude, could you share some examples of peaceful human traditions? Perhaps something involving harmony or tranquility? Dr. Vasquez brightened immediately. Oh, meditation practices. Those are wonderful examples of how humans actively cultivate inner peace through deliberate mental discipline. The collective sigh of relief was almost audible until she continued. The basic principle is that you sit in uncomfortable positions for extended periods while forcing your mind to confront its own chaotic nature until you achieve a state of enlightened acceptance of universal suffering. Ambassador Keth 9's breathing apparatus made a sound like a dying mechanical bird. Traditional meditation involves acknowledging that all existence is temporary, that attachment leads to pain, and that the only path to peace is recognizing the fundamental emptiness of individual identity. Dr. Vasquez's voice took on the serene quality of someone describing a pleasant garden party. Advanced practitioners spend years in isolated retreat, deliberately exposing themselves to psychological extremes until they transcend the fear of death and dissolution. Representative Zyl's crystalline form had begun making small, cracking noises. "And this is relaxing?" Dr. Theron managed to ask. "Profoundly. Once you fully accept that everything you love will eventually be lost, and that your individual consciousness is an illusion, you experience this incredible sense of liberation from anxiety." Her smile had achieved new heights of unsettling serenity. "Some of our most peaceful humans are the ones who've successfully contemplated their own non-existence until it no longer frightens them." The Vorthak speaker's translator had rebooted itself 3 times during this explanation and was now displaying error messages in 17 different languages. Coordinator Vex made a final, desperate attempt at salvage. "Perhaps we could discuss human approaches to conflict resolution? Restorative justice. That's a beautiful tradition." Dr. Vasquez seemed genuinely delighted by the topic. "The idea is that when someone causes harm, the most effective response isn't punishment, but requiring them to face the people they've hurt and experience the full emotional weight of their actions." She pulled up her final file with obvious satisfaction. "We bring victims and perpetrators together in controlled environments where the victims can express their pain directly and the perpetrators have to sit there and absorb it without defending themselves or minimizing the damage they've caused." Her voice carried the warm approval most species reserved for successful offspring. "It's incredibly confrontational and emotionally devastating, but it produces genuine transformation in ways that simple punishment never could." The silence that greeted this revelation contained entire galaxies of unspoken concern. "The beautiful thing is how it honors both parties' humanity. The victim gets to be fully seen in their pain, and the perpetrator gets the opportunity to develop genuine empathy through direct exposure to suffering they caused." Dr. Vasquez closed her data case with obvious satisfaction. "It requires incredible courage from everyone involved, but that's what makes it so powerful." Dr. Theron looked around the table at his colleagues, recognizing the moment when a psychological evaluation becomes something else entirely. "Dr. Vasquez," he said slowly, "you've described human culture as fundamentally oriented around confronting suffering, embracing conflict, and finding meaning through adversity. That's a beautifully concise summary, yes. And humans consider this healthy? Essential. A human who hasn't learned to face difficulties with grace and courage isn't really prepared for adult life." She tilted her head with genuine curiosity. "How do other species handle existential challenges?" The question hung in the air like a philosophical sword of Damocles. Finally, Ambassador Keth 9 spoke. "Dr. Vasquez, most species in the consortium have spent the last several millennia developing increasingly sophisticated methods for avoiding existential challenges entirely." Her expression shifted for the first time, moving from enthusiastic to genuinely puzzled. "But how do you grow as individuals? How do you develop resilience? How do you discover what you're truly capable of?" Representative Zyl made a sound like crystal wind chimes in a hurricane. "Dr. Vasquez, we've organized our entire civilizations around the principle that growth through suffering is unnecessary." "Oh." Dr. Vasquez sat back in her chair, finally beginning to understand that something significant had been happening during this conversation. "Oh, I see. You were evaluating us, weren't you?" The silence confirmed her suspicion. "And you were concerned because we tell stories about terrible things happening, and we seem to enjoy them." She looked around the table with dawning comprehension. "You thought we might be dangerous." "The thought had occurred to us," Coordinator Vex admitted. Dr. Vasquez considered this for a long moment. Then she smiled again. But this time it was different. Less innocent, more knowing. "You know what the really funny thing is? You're absolutely right to be concerned. We are dangerous. Not because we're violent or aggressive, but because we're willing to do things that would paralyze other species with terror. Her voice carried a new edge of recognition. We'll walk into situations that would give you nightmares because someone has to, and we've trained ourselves to be the kind of people who can. The environmental systems had given up entirely. Warning klaxons were sounding, but nobody moved. The question isn't whether humans are dangerous, she continued with perfect calm. The question is whether the galaxy needs someone who's dangerous in the right ways. Dr. Theron found himself writing notes again, but now with entirely different purpose. Dr. Vasquez, what would you say if I told you that the consortium has been searching for a species capable of handling the types of existential threats that our peaceful civilizations can't even conceptualize? Her smile widened. I'd say it sounds like you found what you were looking for. The meeting was officially over, but somehow that felt less like an ending than a beginning.